In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a blaze consumes the study of Reginald Hawthorne, a ruthless landlord, leaving him dead in secrets, smoldering in the ashes. Was it his desperate tenant, Victor Crane, hiding a forged lease? His fearful wife, guarding her own thefts? The ambitious agent, Percival Lang, with crooked books? Or the loyal handyman, Tom Baines, blinded by duty? Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and gentle cunning, unravels a web of deceit, where a single spark reveals a murderer's truth. Dive into a mystery where every clue burns bright, and no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The smell of smoke. The late afternoon sun cast a golden haze over St. Mary Mead, where the village drowsed in the soft embrace of an English summer. Roses nodded in cottage gardens, and the distant chime of the church clock marked the hour with unhurried grace. In her neat parlor at Danemead Cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale pink shawl for a niece's newborn. The world, to all appearances, was at peace. Yet Miss Marple, with her keen eyes and sharper mind, knew that even in such tranquil places, darkness could stir. The interruption came with a knock, brisk and urgent, at the front door. Lily, Miss Marple's young maid, hurried to answer it, her apron slightly askew from an afternoon of polishing silver. Moments later, she burst into the parlor, her round face flushed with excitement. "Oh, Miss Marple, such a to-do," she gasped, clutching a tea towel. "It's Squire's and Mr. Hawthorne's manor. There's been a fire, and they say he's dead, burned in his study." Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch, her mild blue eyes lifting to meet Lily's. "Dead, you say?" Her voice was gentle, but there was a note in it, a quiet alertness, that those who knew her well might have recognized as the first stirring of curiosity. "Tell me, Lily, what exactly did you hear?" Lily, eager to share the village's freshest gossip, needed little prompting. She had been at the butcher's, she explained, when the fire brigade's bell clanged through the high street, drawing a crowd of onlookers. Mrs. Bantry, who had been passing by on her way to the vicarage, relayed the grim tale. Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, the wealthy but unpopular landlord of Squire's End, had been found in his study, the room engulfed in flames. The fire, mercifully, had not spread beyond the study, but Mr. Hawthorne had not been so fortunate. "They couldn't save him," Lily said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "Charred, they say, right at his desk." Miss Marple sat, her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "How very dreadful," she murmured, though her mind was already turning over the details. Reginald Hawthorne was a man known in St. Mary Mead for his sharp temper and sharper business dealings. His manor, Squire's End, stood on the village's edge, a Georgian pile of faded elegance, its grounds dotted with tenant cottages. Hawthorne's wealth came from these properties, but so did his reputation for ruthlessness. Tenants whispered of sudden rent increases, and even his wife, the quiet Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne, was said to tread carefully around his moods. A fire, Miss Marple thought, was a violent end for such a menand violence. In her experience, rarely struck without reason. "Did anyone mention how the fire started?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as casual as if she were inquiring about the weather. Lily shook her head. "Not a word, Miss. But Mr. Price at the shop said the police are up there now, and Inspector Craddock himself was seen going in. They're saying it's suspicious." She hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Bantry thinks it might be murder." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Dolly Bantry, her old friend, had a flair for the dramatic, but she was not always wrong. "Murder is a strong word, Lily," she said, rising from her chair with a sprightliness that belied her years. "But I think I shall take a walk. The air will do me good, and perhaps I might call at the vicarage. Mrs. Bantry may know more by now." Lily nodded, already bustling back to the kitchen, her mind no doubt racing with theories. Miss Marple, however, moved with purpose. She donned her straw hat, pinned it neatly, and selected a light shawl against the evening's coming chill. As she stepped into the lane, the scent of honeysuckle greeted her, but her thoughts were elsewhere. A fire in his study, a man dead at his desk. These were not the random acts of fate. They suggested intent, perhaps even calculation. And if there was calculation, there was a mind behind it, a mind that Miss Marple, with her unassuming ways, was singularly equipped to uncover. Her walk took her past the high street, where knots of villagers lingered, their voices hushed but eager. She caught fragments of speculation. Hawthorne had enemies, mark my words. That tenant of his, Crane, was always shouting about the rent. And what about that agent, Lang? Too smooth by half. Miss Marple filed each snippet away, her face a mask of polite disinterest. By the time she reached the vicarage, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of apricot and rose. Mrs. Bantry greeted her with a cry of delight. "Jane, you've heard, of course. Isn't it ghastly? Come in, Neve. Just had a word with Colonel Bantry, who's been up at Squire's End with the fire chief. Over tea and seed cake." Dolly poured out the details. The study's door had been locked, the key found in Hawthorne's pocket. The fire had burned fiercely, but oddly contained, sparing most of the house. And, most intriguing to Miss Marple, a few papers on the desk had survived, their edges scorched, but their contents intact. Papers, Miss Marple repeated softly, her eyes narrowing. How curious that they should escape the flames. Dolly leaned forward, her voice conspiratorial. "Exactly. Arthur thinks it's arson, and so do I. Someone wanted Reginald Hawthorne dead and those papers. Jane, they must mean something." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind as sharp as the crackle of kindling. Papers, a locked door, a man despised by many already. The threads of a pattern were forming, faint but unmistakable. "I dare say you're right, Dolly," she said, her voice mild. "But we mustn't jump to conclusions. After all, the truth has a way of revealing itself, like a weed pushing through a crack." As she walked home in the gathering dusk, the village lights twinkling like stars, Miss Marple felt a familiar stir of anticipation. St. Mary Mead might seem a sleepy place, but beneath its surface, human nature was as tangled and treacherous as ever. She would watch, she would listen, and, in time, she would understand. For now, the smell of smoke lingered in her mind, a warning that this puzzle, like the fire itself, would not easily be extinguished. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The morning after the fire at Squire's End dawned with a deceptive calm, the kind that often follows a storm in St. Mary Mead. Mist clung to the meadows, softening the outlines of hedgerows and rooftops, and the air carried a faint temps of charred wood, a reminder of the tragedy that had shaken the village. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, had already breakfasted on tea and toast when she decided to pay a visit to the manor. Her curiosity, though cloaked in the guise of neighborly concern, was as sharp as the pruning shears she used on her. Roses, a man burned in his study, papers spared by the flames. These were not mere details, but signposts, and Miss Marple was determined to follow where they led. She chose her oldest coat, a serviceable tweed that suggested practicality rather than prying, and set out along the lane. The path to Squire's End wound past the churchyard, where rooks cawed mournfully, and up a gentle rise to the manor's iron gates. The house itself loomed against the gray sky, its Georgian facade marred by streaks of soot above the study windows. A constable stood at the entrance, his youthful face set in a frown, but he recognized Miss Marple from her occasional chats with Inspector Craddock. "Morning, miss," he said, touching his helmet. "Inspector's inside, if you're wanting a word." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with that disarming warmth that so often opened doors. "How kind of you," she said. "I only thought to offer my condolences to Mrs. Hawthorne, but if the inspector is here, Perhaps I might see him first. Such a dreadful business, isn't it? The constable nodded, clearly relieved to share the weight of the morning's gloom. Dreadful's the word, Miss. Never seen a fire like it burned hot, but didn't touch the rest of the house. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. They're saying it wasn't natural, if you take my meaning. Miss Marple's expression remained one of gentle sympathy, but her mind seized on the word unnatural. She murmured something vague about the unpredictability of fate and followed the constable's directions to the library, where Inspector Craddock was overseeing the investigation. The manor's interior was as grand as she remembered from a long-ago garden party, though its polished floors and gilt mirrors seemed dimmed by the shadow of death. Portraits of stern Hawthorne ancestors gazed down, their painted eyes offering no clues to the violence that had invaded their home. Inspector Craddock, a lean man with a quick mind and a respect for Miss Marple's unorthodox methods, greeted her with a wry smile. "Miss Marple, I might have known you'd turn up," he said, pushing a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "Come to offer your sympathies, or is there more to it?" Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost self-deprecating. "Oh, Inspector, you know me too well. I confess, I couldn't help but wonder about poor Mr. Hawthorne. Lily heard such shocking things at the market, and I thought, well, perhaps a look at the scene might settle my mind. If it's not too much trouble, of course." Craddock's smile widened, though his eyes remained shrewd. He had worked with Miss Marple before, and knew her settling of mind often led to unsettling truths. "No trouble at all," he said. "The study's a mess, mind you, but we've cleared the worst of it. Come along, I'll show you what we're dealing with." They crossed the hall to a heavy oak door, its surface scorched but intact. A faint whiff of smoke lingered, mingling with a sharper chemical scent that Miss Marple recognized at once. "Paraffin," she said, almost to herself, as Craddock pushed the door open. He glanced at her, unsurprised by her acuity. "Exactly," he said. "Arson, plain as day. Someone doused the rug and set it alight. Hawthorne didn't stand a chance." The study was a scene of devastation, yet it retained an eerie semblance of its former purpose. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents reduced to blackened spines and ash. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center, its surface blistered by heat, and a high-backed chair lay toppled, its leather upholstery melted into grotesque folds. The windows, once framed by velvet curtains, were now bare, the fabric consumed by the flames. The rug beneath the desk was a charred ruin, its intricate pattern obliterated by a dark, irregular stain that marked the fire's heart. Miss Marple's eyes, however, were drawn to the desk itself, where a small pile of papers lay. Their edges curled and singed, but their text miraculously legible. "Curious, isn't it?" Craddock said, following her gaze. The fire burned hottest around the rug, but it spared those papers, almost as if someone wanted them to survive. Miss Marple stepped closer, her movements careful, as if the room itself might whisper its secrets. The papers were a mix of letters and documents, their ink faded but intact. One, she noted, bore the letterhead of a London solicitor, another the unmistakable flourish of a lease agreement. "Mr. Hawthorne was a meticulous man, I understand," she said, her tone light. "Always reviewing his affairs." Craddock nodded, his hands in his pockets. "So his wife says. He spent hours in here, locking the door behind him. Paranoid, if you ask me, thought everyone was out to cheat him." He pointed to a brass key, now bagged and labeled on a side table. "That was in his pocket when we found him. Door was locked from the inside." Miss Marple's brows lifted slightly. "Locked from the inside," she repeated, her voice thoughtful. "And yet the fire was set deliberately. How very puzzling." Craddock's expression grew grim. "Puzzling's one word for it. We're looking at murder, Miss Marple. The paraffin wasn't spilled by accident. It was poured, and plenty of it. Someone wanted Hawthorne dead, and they didn't care if the whole room went up with him." Miss Marple's gaze swept the room again, cataloging details with the precision of a seamstress measuring cloth. The candelabrum on the mantel, its silver warped by heat, suggested no candles had been lit that night. A decanter of brandy, its crystal cracked, stood untouched on a sideboard. The fireplace was cold, its grate empty of recent ash. And yet, the paraffin's acrid scent lingered, a silent accusation. She turned back to the desk, her eyes lingering on the papers. "These documents," she said, "have you had a chance to examine them?" "Not thoroughly," Craddock admitted. "We've been focused on the fire itself. But they're mostly business leases, contracts, that sort of thing." Hawthorne was in a dispute with his tenant, Victor Crane, over rent. Might be something there. Miss Marple nodded, her face serene but her mind racing. A dispute with a tenant, a locked door, papers spared by the flames. These were pieces of a puzzle, and she sensed they fit together in a way that was not yet clear. "And Mrs. Hawthorne?" she asked, her tone casual. "How is she bearing up?" Craddock's jaw tightened. "Stoic, I'd say. She's in the drawing room, keeping to herself. Says she was asleep when the fire started, didn't know a thing until the servants raised the alarm. We'll question her properly later, along with the others." "The others?" Miss Marple prompted, though she already knew the answer. "The household, such as it is," Craddock said. "There's Crane, the tenant lives in a cottage on the estate, always arguing with Hawthorne. Then Percival Lang, the estate agent, who handled Hawthorne's properties. And Tom Baines, the handyman, who was around the manor that day. All of them had access, and none of them liked Hawthorne much." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "Few people did, I gather," she said. "He was not a man to inspire affection." Craddock snorted. "That's pudding," it mildly. "The man had a talent for making enemies. If I had a shilling for every tenant who cursed his name, I'd be retired by now." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she said nothing, her attention returning to the room. She moved to the window, its frame blackened but unbroken, and peered out at the garden below. The lawn was neatly trimmed, a testament to Tom Baines' diligence, but a faint path of trampled grass led from the study's French doors to a copse of trees. "Was this door locked as well?" she asked, her finger tracing the latch. Craddock joined her, frowning. "Yes, and bolted. No one came in or out that way, not without breaking the glass, and it's intact." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. A locked room, a fire set with purpose, and papers that refused to burn each fact, was a thread, and she would weave them together in time. For now, she turned to Craddock, her expression one of mild concern. "You have a difficult task ahead, Inspector," she said, "but I'm sure you'll get to the bottom of it. Might I speak with Mrs. Hawthorne before I go? It seems only proper to offer a few words of comfort." Craddock hesitated, then shrugged. "Can't see the harm. She's in the drawing room, down the hall, but don't expect much. She's not exactly forthcoming." Miss Marple thanked him and made her way to the drawing room, her steps soft on the polished floor. The room was a stark contrast to the study, its chintz, curtains, and delicate furniture untouched by the fire's wrath. Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne sat by a low table, her black morning dress absorbing the light. She was a woman of middle years, her face pale and composed, but her hands betrayed a faint tremor as she poured tea from a silver pot. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Miss Marple said, her voice warm with sympathy, "I am so very sorry for your loss. I hope I'm not intruding." Mrs. Hawthorne looked up, her gray eyes guarded, but polite. "Not at all, Miss Marple," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit. It's kind of you to call." Miss Marple settled herself, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Such a terrible shock," she said. "I understand Mr. Hawthorne was in his study when it happened. He must have been a very busy man, always working." Mrs. Hawthorne's lips tightened, a flicker of emotion crossing her face. "Reginald was never idle," she said. He lived for his business, his properties, his accounts. He spent every evening in that study, going over papers. She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, he was particular about them. Miss Marple nodded, her face a mask of gentle interest. Particular, she repeated. I suppose he had to be, with so many responsibilities. Did he ever mention anything troubling him? A disagreement, perhaps? Mrs. Hawthorne's hand paused on the teapot, her eyes flicking to Miss Marple's. He was always troubled, she said carefully. Reginald saw dishonesty everywhere. Lately, he was cross with Mr. Crane, the tenant. Something about the terms of his lease. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained unchanged. How distressing, she said. But I'm sure the inspector will sort it all out. You must be exhausted, my dear. I shan't keep you. Mrs. Hawthorne offered a thin smile, and Miss Marple rose, her mind already turning over the widow's words. A lease, a suspicious husband, a fire that spared just enough to raise questions. These were not coincidences, but clues, and Miss Marple was determined to follow them. As she stepped back into the hall, she caught sight of a figure lingering near the staircase. Tom Baines, the handyman, his cap twisted in his hands. His eyes met hers, then darted away, and Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with him soon. She bid Craddock goodbye, promising to keep out of his way, though both knew she would do no such thing. As she walked back to St. Mary Mead, the mist, lifting to reveal a pale sun, Miss Marple's thoughts were as clear as the sky. The study held secrets, and the papers on that desk were the key. Someone had set the fire, not just to kill Reginald Hawthorne, but to hide something or to ensure something was found. And Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and relentless curiosity, would not rest until she knew what it was. Chapter 3. The suspects assemble the inquest into Reginald. Hawthorne's death was held 3 days later in the village hall of St. Mary Mead. A squat building with whitewashed walls and a roof that sagged like an old man's hat. The air inside was close, heavy with the scent of polished wood and the murmur of villagers eager for a glimpse of scandal. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the back, in her usual unobtrusive way, had chosen a spot that afforded a clear view of the proceedings. Her black straw hat, trimmed with a single ribbon, tilted slightly as she observed the room, her knitting tucked into a capacious bag at her feet. To the casual onlooker, she was merely an elderly spinster, drawn by the same morbid curiosity as the rest. But Miss Marple's eyes, bright and unyielding behind her spectacles, missed nothing. The coroner, Mr. Giles Pennington, was a portly man with a voice that boomed through the hall, though his manner suggested he would rather be tending his roses than presiding over such grim business. He called the room to order, and the facts of the case were laid out with clinical precision. Reginald Hawthorne, aged 56, had perished in a fire in his study at Squire's End on the night of July 7th. The fire, fueled by paraffin, had been deliberately set. Death was attributed to smoke inhalation and burns, though the body's condition made precise determination difficult. The room had been locked, the key found in the deceased's pocket. The verdict, Mr. Pennington declared, was death by misadventure. Pending further police inquiry, a polite way of saying murder was suspected. Miss Marple listened, her face serene, but her mind was as active as the bees in her garden. The locked room, the paraffin, the singed papers, these were not mere facts, but pieces of a mosaic, and she was already fitting them together. Her attention, however, was drawn to the 4 figures seated near the front, their postures and glances revealing more than their testimony would. Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne, the widow, sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mourning veil lifted to reveal a face pale but composed. Her gray eyes, when they moved at all, avoided the crowd, fixing instead on some distant point beyond the coroner's table. Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her shoulders stiffened when the fire was mentioned. Grief, perhaps, or something else, guilt, fear, or calculation. Widows, in Miss Marple's experience, were not always what they seemed. Beside her, separated by a few chairs, was Victor Crane, the tenant, a wiry man in his late 30s. He had the sharp features of a fox and the restless energy of one cornered. His suit, though clean, was ill-fitting, and his fingers drummed in irregular rhythm on his knee. When the coroner mentioned the lease dispute, Crane's jaw tightened, and his eyes darted to the floor. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. A nervous man, she thought, and nervous men often had secrets. Mr. Percival Lang, the estate agent, presented a stark contrast. Seated with the poise of a man accustomed to public scrutiny, he was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his tie knotted with precision. His smooth, almost boyish face betrayed no emotion, and his voice, when he was called to confirm Hawthorne's business dealings, was calm and measured. Yet Miss Marple detected a faint strain in his posture, a rigidity that suggested he was not as at ease as he wished to appear. Lang, she recalled, had managed Hawthorne's properties for years, but rumors of discrepancies had reached even her quiet parlor. Lastly, there was Tom Baines, the handyman, a hulking figure who seemed out of place in the formal setting. His broad shoulders hunched as if to make himself smaller, and his calloused hands twisted a worn cap with such force that Miss Marple feared it might tear. When questioned about his duties at Squire's End, he answered in a low, halting voice. His words simple but honest. Fixed the fences, mended the roof, he mumbled. Saw Mr. Hawthorne that day, but not after supper. His eyes, when they met Miss Marple's, held a flicker of unease, as if he sensed the weight of suspicion. The inquest concluded with little fanfare. The coroner's verdict, leaving the villagers buzzing with speculation. Miss Marple lingered, as the crowd dispersed, her slow steps allowing her to overhear snatches of conversation. "Crane's the one," muttered Mr. Price, the butcher, to his wife. "Always shouting at Hawthorne over that cottage." A woman nearby shook her head. "I say it's Lang too clever by half, that one." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Village gossip, like her knitting, was full of loose ends, but it often pointed to the truth. She made her way to the tea shop across the street, where Mrs. Bent was waiting, her eyes alight with the thrill of the morning's drama. "Jane, wasn't it ghastly?" she exclaimed, waving Miss Marple to a table. "All those questions, and not a single answer. Arthur says the police are stumped, but I told him you'd have it sorted in no time." Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost apologetic. "Oh, Dolly, you do exaggerate. I'm only an old woman who likes to listen. But I will say, the inquest was illuminating." Dolly leaned forward, her teacup forgotten. "Illuminating how?" "Come, Jane, don't be coy. You saw something, didn't you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she chose her words with care. "I saw 4 people, each with their own burdens. Mrs. Hawthorne is afraid of what? I'm not yet sure. Mr. Crane is hiding something, and it makes him jumpy. Mr. Lang is too polished, which is never a good sign. And poor Tom Baines, he's loyal, but loyalty can blind a man to what's right." Dolly's mouth opened, then closed. "You got all that from watching them sit there? Jane, you're a marvel. But who, do you think, did it?" Chapter 3. The suspects assemble the inquest into Reginald. Hawthorne's death was held 3 days later in the village hall of St. Mary Mead, a squat building with whitewashed walls and a roof that sagged like an old man's hat. The air inside was close, heavy with the scent of polished wood and the murmur of villagers eager for a glimpse of scandal. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the back, in her usual unobtrusive way, had chosen a spot that afforded a clear view of the proceedings. Her black straw hat, trimmed with a single ribbon, tilted slightly as she observed the room, her knitting tucked into a capacious bag at her feet. To the casual onlooker, she was merely an elderly spinster, drawn by the same morbid curiosity as the rest. but Miss Marple's eyes, bright and unyielding behind her spectacles, missed nothing. The coroner, Mr. Giles Pennington, was a portly man with a voice that boomed through the hall, though his manner suggested he would rather be tending his roses than presiding over such grim business. He called the room to order, and the facts of the case were laid out with clinical precision. Reginald Hawthorne, aged 56, had perished in a fire in his study at Squire's End on the night of July 7th. The fire, fueled by paraffin, had been deliberately set. Death was attributed to smoke inhalation and burns, though the body's condition made precise determination difficult. The room had been locked, the key found in the deceased's pocket. The verdict, Mr. Pennington declared, was death by misadventure. Pending further police inquiry, a polite way of saying murder was suspected. Miss Marple listened, her face serene, but her mind was as active as the bees in her garden. The locked room, the paraffin, the singed papers, these were not mere facts, but pieces of a mosaic, and she was already fitting them together. Her attention, however, was drawn to the four figures seated near the front, their postures and glances revealing more than their testimony would. Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne, the widow, sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mourning veil lifted to reveal a face pale but composed. Her gray eyes, when they moved at all, avoided the crowd, fixing instead on some distant point beyond the coroner's table. Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her shoulders stiffened when the fire was mentioned. Grief, perhaps, or something else, guilt, fear, or calculation. Widows, in Miss Marple's experience, were not always what they seemed. Beside her, separated by a few chairs, was Victor Crane, the tenant, a wiry man in his late 30s. He had the sharp features of a fox and the restless energy of one cornered. His suit, though clean, was ill-fitting, and his fingers drummed in a regular rhythm on his knee. When the coroner mentioned the lease dispute, Crane's jaw tightened, and his eyes darted to the floor. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. A nervous man, she thought, and nervous men often had secrets. Mr. Percival Lang, the estate agent, presented a stark contrast. Seated with the poise of a man accustomed to public scrutiny, he was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his tie knotted with precision. His smooth, almost boyish face betrayed no emotion, and his voice, when he was called to confirm Hawthorne's business dealings, was calm and measured. Yet Miss Marple detected a faint strain in his posture, a rigidity that suggested he was not as at ease as he wished to appear. Lang, she recalled, had managed Hawthorne's properties for years, but rumors of discrepancies had reached even her quiet parlor. Lastly, there was Tom Baines, the handyman, a hulking figure who seemed out of place in the formal setting. His broad shoulders hunched as if to make himself smaller, and his calloused hands twisted a worn cap with such force that Miss Marple feared it might tear. When questioned about his duties at Squire's End, he answered in a low, halting voice. His words simple but honest. Fixed the fences, mended the roof, he mumbled. Saw Mr. Hawthorne that day, but not after supper. His eyes, when they met Miss Marple's, held a flicker of unease, as if he sensed the weight of suspicion. The inquest concluded with little fanfare, the coroner's verdict leaving the villagers buzzing with speculation. Miss Marple lingered as the crowd dispersed, her slow steps allowing her to overhear snatches of conversation. "Crane's the one," muttered Mr. Price, the butcher, to his wife. "Always shouting at Hawthorne over that cottage." A woman nearby shook her head. "I say it's Lang too clever by half, that one." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Village gossip, like her knitting, was full of loose ends, but it often pointed to the truth. She made her way to the tea shop across the street, where Mrs. Bent was waiting, her eyes alight with the thrill of the morning's drama. "Jane, wasn't it ghastly?" she exclaimed, waving Miss Marple to a table. "All those questions, and not a single answer. Arthur says the police are stumped, but I told him you'd have it sorted in no time." Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost apologetic. "Oh, Dolly, you do exaggerate. I'm only an old woman who likes to listen. But I will say, the inquest was illuminating." Dolly leaned forward, her teacup forgotten. "Illuminating how?" "Come, Jane, don't be coy. You saw something, didn't you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she chose her words with care. "I saw 4 people, each with their own burdens. Mrs. Hawthorne is afraid of what? I'm not yet sure. Mr. Crane is hiding something, and it makes him jumpy. Mr. Lang is too polished, which is never a good sign. And poor Tom Baines, he's loyal, but loyalty can blind a man to what's right." Dolly's mouth opened, then closed. "You got all that from watching them sit there? Jane, you're a marvel. But who, do you think, did it?" Chapter 4. The Widow's Tale. The following afternoon. Squire's End wore a veneer of solemnity, its windows draped with black crepe, and its grand hall hushed for the memorial tea. Miss Jane Marple arrived promptly, her lemon cake cradled in a wicker basket, her demeanor one of quiet condolence. The manor's gardens, though still lush with summer blooms, seemed subdued, as if the roses themselves mourned the loss of their master. Inside, the drawing-room was crowded with villagers, their voices low, but laced with the eager undertone of those drawn to tragedy. Miss Marple, with her knack for blending into any gathering, slipped through the throng, her eyes sharp beneath the brim of her hat. Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne stood near the fireplace, receiving condolences with the poise of a woman accustomed to duty. Her black silk dress, severe in its simplicity, accentuated her pallor, and her hands, clasped before her, bore the faintest tremble. Miss Marple approached, offering her sympathies with a warmth that invited trust. "My dear Mrs. Hawthorne," she said, "how bravely you bear this sorrow. I do hope you're managing a little rest." Mrs. Hawthorne's gray eyes met hers, guarded but grateful. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's difficult, but one must carry on. Would you care for tea? I've had a table set in the small parlor. It's quieter there." Miss Marple accepted with a nod, sensing an opportunity. The small parlor, tucked at the end of a corridor, was a haven of faded elegance: chintz armchairs, a rosewood tea table, and a single window overlooking the herb garden. The air was cool, free of the drawing-room's stifling grief, and Miss Marple settled into a chair, her basket at her feet. Mrs. Hawthorne poured tea with a steady hand, though her movements had a mechanical quality, as if she performed them by rote. "You're very kind to host so many today," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle. "It must be a comfort to know Mr. Hawthorne was so respected." Mrs. Hawthorne's lips twitched, a fleeting shadow of irony crossing her face. "Respected," she echoed, setting the teapot down. "Reginald was a forceful man. People admired his success, but respect, that was harder won." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of mild curiosity. "He was a man of strong character, I gather. Such men often leave a mark, for better or worse. Did he share his burdens with you? His business, perhaps?" The widow hesitated, her fingers tightening on her cup. "Reginald kept his own counsel," she said at last. "He was consumed by his property's leases, rents, accounts. He saw threats everywhere, always suspecting someone of cheating him." Her voice was low, almost confessional. "It made him difficult, even at home." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft with sympathy. "That must have been trying," she said. "A man so vigilant would surely notice anything amiss." "Did he mention anyone in particular? A tenant, perhaps, or his agent?" Mrs. Hawthorne's gaze flickered, a spark of unease breaking her composure. "He did," she admitted, her words measured. "Victor Crane, the tenant, was often in his thoughts. Reginald believed Crane was dishonest about his lease. He spoke of it the very day he died." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "How distressing," she murmured. A lease can be such a thorny matter. Was Mr. Hawthorne planning to act on his suspicions? He was, Mrs. Hawthorne said, her voice barely above a whisper. He locked himself in his study that night, going over papers. He always locked the door, said it kept his work safe. She paused, her eyes drifting to the window. I was asleep when the fire started. I didn't know until the servants woke me. Miss Marple set her cup down, her mind turning over the widow's words. The locked door, the papers, Crane's name, each detail was a thread, and she sensed they wove a pattern far from simple. You poor dear, she said. To lose him so suddenly, and in such a way. Did he often work so late? Always, Mrs. Hawthorne replied, a note of bitterness creeping in. He hoarded his wealth like a dragon, guarding it even from me. I sometimes wondered if he trusted anyone at all. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles, but she kept her tone light. Men like that often see enemies where there are none, she said. But I'm sure he valued your support, even if he didn't show it. And his papers, were they all kept in the study? Mrs. Hawthorne nodded, her expression tightening. Most of them. He had a safe for the important ones behind a painting in the study. I told the inspector as much, though I don't know what they found. Miss Marple filed this away, her mind already racing. A safe, papers, a man obsessed with control. These were not mere facts, but clues to a motive. She leaned forward, her voice soft with concern. You've been so strong, my dear. But if there's anything troubling you, anything at all, you mustn't keep it to yourself. A burden shared is a burden halved, you know. Mrs. Hawthorne's lips parted, as if on the verge of confession, but she caught herself, her composure snapping back like a shutter. You're very kind, she said, rising. But I must return to the guests. Please, enjoy your tea, Miss. Marple watched her go, her mind as busy as the bees in her garden. The widow's hesitation, her mention of Crane, the safe, these were not the words of a woman at ease. Grief could explain her reserve, but Miss Marple suspected more, fear, perhaps, or a secret she dared not voice. She recalled Mrs. Pritchard, a widow in St. Mary Mead, years ago, who had hidden her husband's cruelty until it drove her to despair. Mrs. Hawthorne was different, more guarded, but the signs were there, faint but unmistakable. She finished her tea, her thoughts turning to the other suspects. Victor Crane was in the drawing room, she knew, his sharp voice cutting through the murmur as he spoke to a villager. Percival Lang, too, was present, his polished charm drawing admiring glances. Tom Baines had been seen earlier, lurking near the stables, his cap pulled low. Each had a role in this drama, and Miss Marple resolved to speak with them all. But for now, Mrs. Hawthorne's words echoed in her mind, each one a clue to the fire that had consumed Reginald Hawthorne. As she rejoined the gathering, Miss Marple moved with her usual quiet grace, her lemon cake offered to a grateful Mrs. Bantry, who was holding court near the buffet. Jane, you've been hiding, Dolly exclaimed, her eyes bright with gossip. What did you make of Evelyn? She looks like a ghost, doesn't she? Miss Marple smiled, her tone mild. She's bearing up, Dolly, as best she can, but loss is a heavy thing, and it leaves its mark. Dolly leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Mark, indeed. I heard from Mrs. Price that Evelyn and Reginald barely spoke these last months. And that Crane fellow, did you see how he flinched when the lease was mentioned at the inquest? I'd wager he's up to no good. Miss Marple's lips twitched, but she said nothing, her mind already weaving the threads of the day. The memorial tea, with its polite facades and hidden tensions, had given her much to ponder. She would visit Crane next, she decided, and then Lang, and perhaps Baines. Each would reveal something, whether they meant to or not, for people, as Miss Marple knew, could no more hide their truths than a flower could hide its scent. As she left Squire's End, the sun dipping low over the hills, Miss Marple felt a quiet certainty. The fire had been no accident, and the motive lay buried in the lives of those it had touched. She would dig, gently, but relentlessly, until the truth lay bare. For now, she walked home, her steps light, her mind as clear as the evening sky, ready for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Chapter 5. The Tenant's Temper. The morning after the memorial tea, Miss Jane Marple set out for the tenant's cottage on the Squire's End estate, a modest dwelling nestled among hawthorn hedges and overshadowed by the manor's looming silhouette. The sky was overcast, a soft gray that promised rain, and the air carried the earthy scent of damp grass. Miss Marple, clad in a sensible mackintosh and carrying a basket of homemade scones as a pretext for her visit, walked with the unhurried gait of one who knew her destination, but was in no rush to arrive. Her mind, however, was far from idle, turning over Mrs. Hawthorne's guarded words about Victor Crane and the lease that had so preoccupied her husband. The cottage, with its thatched roof and peeling paint, bore the marks of neglect, a silent testament to the disputes that had soured relations between tenant and landlord. Miss Marple knocked lightly, her knuckles barely disturbing the weathered door. A moment later, Victor Crane appeared, his lean frame filling the doorway. His sharp features, framed by untidy dark hair, tightened at the sight of her, but he masked his irritation with a thin smile. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Crane. I was passing by and thought you might enjoy some scones, fresh from my oven. May I come in? It's rather chilly out here." Crane hesitated, his fingers twitching at his side. But the offer of scones and Miss Marple's air of harmless curiosity proved difficult to refuse. "Right then," he muttered, stepping aside. "Mind the step." The cottage's interior was sparse, its furnishings worn but tidy. A small table held a clutter of papers, and a locked drawer in a rickety desk caught Miss Marple's eye, its brass handle gleaming incongruously against the faded wood. Crane gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple settled herself, placing the basket on the table with a flourish. "You're very kind to receive me," she said, her tone light. "I imagine you've had a trying time, with all that's happened at Squire's End." Crane's jaw tightened, and he sank into a chair opposite her, his hands restless. "Trying's one word for it," he said. "Hawthorne's death has the whole village in a stir, and the police poking about doesn't help." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy. "It's dreadful, isn't it? Such a shock for everyone. I understand you and Mr. Hawthorne had your differences. It must make this all the more difficult." Crane's eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance flaring. "Differences? That's putting it mildly. Hawthorne was a tyrant, squeezing every penny he could from this place. Raised my rent twice this year, and for what? A roof that leaks, and walls that crumble." His voice rose, his hands clenching into fists. "I told him what I thought of his greed, and I'd do it again." Miss Marple's gaze remained steady, though her heart quickened at his vehemence. "Goodness," she said softly, "that sounds terribly unfair. Did he give any reason for the increases?" Crane snorted, leaning back in his chair. "Reason? He didn't need one. Said the estate was his to manage, and if I didn't like it, I could leave. But this cottage, it's my home. Been here 5 years, and I've rights, lease or no lease." His eyes flicked to the locked drawer, a movement so brief Miss Marple might have missed it had she not been watching closely. "A lease can be a great comfort," she said, her tone conversational. "I suppose Mr. Hawthorne was particular about such things, keeping all his papers in order." Crane's fingers drummed on the table, his agitation palpable. "Particular. He was obsessed. Always waving that lease in my face, saying it wasn't what I thought. Accused me of tampering with it. Can you believe that? Me? Tamper?" His laugh was harsh, but it faltered, and he looked away, his bravado crumbling. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild surprise. Tampering? How extraordinary. I'm sure you set him straight. You strike me as a man who values honesty. Crane flushed, his hands stilling. I told him where to shove his accusations, he muttered, but he wouldn't listen. Kept those papers locked up, like they were gold. And now he's dead, and the police are sniffing around, thinking I had something to do with it. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was as sharp as a needle. How distressing, she said, to be suspected when you've done nothing wrong. Were you at the cottage that night, Mr. Crane? It's such a comfort to have an alibi in times like these. Crane's gaze darted to hers, then away. I was here, he said, his voice flat, all evening. Didn't see a soul, didn't hear a thing, until the fire bells woke me. That's all I told the inspector, and it's all I'll say now. Miss Marple nodded, her face a mask of understanding. Of course. The police do ask such tiresome questions, but I'm sure it will all be cleared up soon. She rose, smoothing her skirt. Thank you for the chat, Mr. Crane. I do hope the scones bring a little cheer, and if you ever need a sympathetic ear, my cottage is always open. Crane mumbled a reply, his relief at her departure evident. As Miss Marple stepped into the drizzle, she glanced back at the cottage, her thoughts racing. Crane's temper, his fixation on the lease, the locked drawer, these were not the signs of an innocent man. She recalled young Freddie Stokes, a lad in St. Mary Mead who had forged a receipt to avoid a debt. His nervous bluster, much like Crane's. Freddie had been caught when his lies unraveled, and Miss Marple suspected Crane's might do the same. She made her way back to the village, the rain pattering softly on her umbrella. The lease, she thought, was the heart of it. Mrs. Hawthorne had said her husband suspected Crane of dishonesty, and Crane's own words confirmed the tension. Had he forged the lease to secure his tenancy at a lower rate, or to claim rights he didn't have? And if so, had he set the fire to destroy the evidence, only for the flames to spare the very papers he feared? The locked drawer nagged at her a hiding place, perhaps, for a copy of the forged document. As she neared Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her next steps. She would speak with Percival Lang, the estate agent, whose smooth demeanor hid its own secrets, and Tom Baines, the handyman, might know more than his simple manner suggested. Each suspect was a piece of the puzzle, and Miss Marple was determined to fit them together. She paused at her gate, her eyes lingering on the roses, their petals heavy with rain. People, she mused, were like gardens. They could appear orderly, but beneath the surface, roots tangled and weeds grew. Crane's temper had revealed a glimpse of his roots, and Miss Marple would dig deeper. For now, she entered her cottage, the warmth of her parlor, a welcome contrast to the chill outside. She would bake another batch of scones, she decided, and plan her next visit. The truth, like a seed, was buried, but with patience, it would break through. Chapter 6. The agent's ambitions. A drizzle of the previous day had given way to a crisp, clear morning, the kind that made St. Mary Mead sparkle as if polished by an unseen hand. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a breakfast of tea and marmalade, toast, set out for the village high street, where Mr. Percival Lang kept his office. Her basket, this time filled with a jar of her homemade gooseberry jam, swung lightly on her arm, a prop in her campaign of gentle inquiry. The air was fresh with the scent of cut grass, and the church bells chimed a cheerful counterpoint to her thoughts, which were as focused as ever on the puzzle of Reginald Hawthorne's death. Lang's office, a narrow building squeezed between the post office and a haberdashery, bore a brass plaque proclaiming P. Lang, estate agent and valuer. Its window displayed neatly typed notices of properties for let, their descriptions promising idyllic retreats that Miss Marple suspected were less charming in reality. She pushed open the door, a bell jingling above, and stepped into a room. That was a study in order, polished oak desk, shelves of leather-bound ledgers, and a typewriter gleaming under a shaft of sunlight. The air smelled faintly of ink and wax, a fitting backdrop for a man whose trade was in contracts and calculations. Percival Lang rose from his desk, his smile as smooth as his tailored suit. He was a man of perhaps 40, with the boyish good looks and easy charm that might have disarmed a less discerning observer. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm but measured. "What a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe the honor?" Miss Marple returned his smile, her eyes crinkling with that deceptive mildness that had coaxed secrets from many a guarded heart. "Good morning, Mr. Lang," she said, setting her basket on a chair. "I was in the village and thought to bring you a little jam gooseberry, my own recipe. I hope it's not an imposition." Lang's smile widened, though his eyes remained watchful. "Not at all. How thoughtful. Please, do sit. Can I offer you tea? I've a kettle in the back." "Miss Marple accepted, settling into a chair with the air of one who had all the time in the world. As Lang busied himself with the tea, she took in the room's details. A locked filing cabinet in the corner, a calendar marked with appointments, and a photograph of a sleek motor car pinned to a corkboard. Ambition, she thought, was written in every line of this office, and ambition, in her experience, could lead to dangerous corners. Lang returned with a tray, pouring tea with the practiced ease of a host. "Now, Miss Marple," he said, handing her a cup, "I suspect this isn't just about jam. You've a reputation for curiosity, and with all that's happened at Squire's End, I'd wager you're here about poor Hawthorne." Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost self-deprecating. "You're too clever, Mr. Lang. I confess, the tragedy has been on my mind. Such a dreadful loss, and so sudden. You worked closely with Mr. Hawthorne, I understand. It must be a great shock." Lang leaned back, his expression one of studied regret. "A shock, indeed. Reginald was a client for years, demanding, but fair in his way. He trusted me to manage his properties, and I like to think I served him well." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple detected a faint edge, as if he chose his words with care. "He was fortunate to have you," she said, her tone warm. "Managing an estate like Squire's End must be quite a responsibility. Leases, rents, repairs. It's a wonder you kept it all straight." Lang's smile was a touch too quick. "It's a matter of systems, Miss Marple. Records, ledgers, regular audits." Hawthorne insisted on precision, and I made sure he got it. He sipped his tea, his eyes never leaving hers. "Of course, he had his quirks, always checking my figures, questioning every shilling. It could be trying." Miss Marple nodded, her face a mask of sympathy. "Some men are like that, aren't they? Always looking for faults. Did he ever find any discrepancies in your work?" Lang's hand paused on his cup, a flicker of tension crossing his face. "Discrepancies? No, nothing of the sort. He was paranoid, that's all. Thought everyone was out to swindle him, tenants, servants, even me. I took it in stride, part of the job." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but her voice remained gentle. "How patient you must be. I suppose he was particularly concerned about his tenants, Mr. Crane, for instance. I hear there was some trouble over his lease." Lang's expression tightened, though he masked it with a shrug. "Crane was a sore point, yes. Hawthorne suspected him of tampering with the lease, trying to lock in a lower rent, or some such nonsense. He asked me to review the documents, but I found nothing amiss. Still, Hawthorne wouldn't let it go. Kept the original in his study, locked up tight." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild interest. "Locked up. He must have been very particular about his papers. Did you ever see them yourself?" Lang hesitated, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "Occasionally, when he needed me to verify something. Leases, contracts, that sort of thing. He had a safe in the study, behind a painting, kept his most sensitive documents there. I told the police about it, of course. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. The safe, mentioned by both Mrs. Hawthorne and now Lang, was becoming a focal point, and she wondered what secrets it held. How thorough of you, she said. And that night, the night of the fire, were you here, in the village? Lang's smile returned, though it lacked its earlier warmth. I was at home, Miss Marple, in my flat above the office. Worked late, then turned in. Didn't hear about the fire until morning. A tragedy, but I'm afraid I've no light to shed on it. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Lang's polish, his careful answers, reminded her of Mr. Hargreaves, a solicitor in St. Mary Mead, who had embezzled funds while smiling at his clients. Hargreaves had been caught when his ledgers failed to match, and she wondered if Lang's records might tell a similar tale. Had Hawthorne's paranoia uncovered something, a misstep in the accounts, perhaps, that Lang wished to conceal? The fire, she thought, might have been meant to destroy more than Elise. You've been most helpful, she said, rising with a smile. I shan't take up more of your time. Do enjoy the jam, it's best with a bit of cream. Lang escorted her to the door, his charm firmly in place. Thank you, Miss Marple, and if you hear any village gossip, do let me know. It's always enlightening. Miss Marple stepped into the high street, the bell jingling behind her. Lang's composure, she thought, was a facade, and beneath it lay a man who knew more than he said. The safe, the lease, Hawthorne's suspicions, these were threads that linked Lang to the crime, though whether as perpetrator or bystander, she could not yet say. She recalled Victor Crane's locked drawer, Mrs. Hawthorne's fear, and now Lang's guarded ambition. Each suspect was a piece of the puzzle, and the fire was the flame that had exposed their edges. As she walked home, the sun breaking through the clouds, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Tom Baines, the handyman. He was the last of the suspects to be questioned, and she sensed his simplicity might hold its own truths. She would seek him out tomorrow, perhaps at Squire's End, where he was often at work. For now, she entered her cottage, the scent of roses greeting her, and sat by the window, her knitting in hand. The truth, she knew, was like a stitch in a pattern, small but essential. And with each conversation, she was closer to completing the design. Chapter 7. The handyman's honesty. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the fields as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Squire's End once more. The estate, with its weathered stone and sprawling grounds, seemed to brood under the weight of recent events, its grandeur dimmed by the memory of fire. Miss Marple carried no basket today, only her handbag and a small notebook tucked within, its pages filled with the jottings of her observations. Her mission was to speak with Tom Baines, the handyman, whose simple manner and quiet loyalty had piqued her curiosity at the inquest. She sensed that his perspective, unpolished though it might be, could shed light on the tangled web of motives surrounding Reginald Hawthorne's death. She found Baines near the stables, his broad frame bent over a broken fence, a hammer in one hand and a fistful of nails in the other. His shirt, patched at the elbows, bore the stains of honest labor, and his face, weathered by years outdoors, creased into a wary smile as he saw her approach. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, touching his cap. "Didn't expect to see you out here." Miss Marple's smile was warm, her eyes bright with that disarming kindness that invited trust. "Good afternoon, Tom," she said, pausing by the fence. "I was taking a walk and saw you working. You do keep the estate in fine shapes. Such a pity it's been overshadowed by this dreadful business." Baines straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with a calloused hand. It's a bad business," he said, his voice low and gruff. "Mr. Hawthorne gone, the house all upset. Never thought I'd see such a thing here." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern. "It's shaken us all," she said. "You were here that day, I understand, working about the manor. It must be hard, carrying on after such a loss. Baines shifted his weight, his eyes dropping to the hammer in his hand. I do what needs doing, he said. Fixed the stable door that morning, then mended some tiles on the roof. Kept busy till supper, then went home. Didn't know about the fire till the next day. Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone conversational. You must see so much, coming and going as you do. Mr. Hawthorne relied on you, I'm sure. Did he? Seem himself that day? No worries or quarrels troubling him? Baines hesitated, his fingers tightening on the hammer. He was prickly, like always, he said slowly. Snapped at me about the roof, said I was too slow. But that was his way, never happy, unless he was grumbling. Didn't seem different though. Not to me. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but her voice remained soft. He was a demanding man, wasn't he? I suppose he had his share of disputes with tenants, perhaps, or others about the estate. Baines nodded, his gaze flickering to the manor. Plenty of that. Mr. Crane, the tenant, was always at odds with him. Heard M arguing more than once, shouting about rent and such. And Mr. Lang, the agent Mr. Hawthorne, didn't trust him, not lately. Kept saying the books weren't right. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face showed only mild interest. The books? That's curious. Did he say anything specific? Baines scratched his head, his brow furrowing. Not much, just mutterings. Said Lang was too clever, hiding things in the numbers. I didn't pay it, mind above my head, that sort of thing. But he was cross, that's sure. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Lang's ambition, Crane's temper, and now Hawthorne's distrust of both it, was a pattern. Growing clearer with each conversation. You're a good observer, Tom, she said. And that night, the night of the fire, did you notice anything unusual? Anyone about the manor who shouldn't have been? Baines's eyes widened, a spark of recollection breaking through his reserve. Now you mention it, he said, his voice dropping. I did see something. After supper, when I was locking up the tool shed, I saw Mr. Crane near the study windows. He was carrying a can metal, like 4 paraffin. Didn't think much of it then, thought he was fixing a lamp or some such. But now, he trailed off, his face troubled. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her expression remained serene. How very interesting, she said. You told the inspector, of course. Baines shook his head, his discomfort plain. Not yet. Didn't seem important at the time, and I don't like to stir trouble. Mr. Crane's got a temper, but he's not a bad sort. Least, I didn't think so. Miss Marple patted his arm, her touch light but reassuring. You've done right to tell me, Tom. The truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable. And you've nothing to fear. Inspector Craddock is a fair man. If you see him, you might mention what you saw. It could help set things right. Baines nodded, though his eyes remained uneasy. I suppose you're right, miss. I'll think on it. Miss Marple smiled, her mind racing. Crane with a paraffin can. Near the study the image was vivid, a piece of the puzzle that fit with chilling precision. She recalled Victor Crane's nervous energy, his locked drawer, and Mrs. Hawthorne's hint of his dishonesty. Had Crane set the fire to destroy a forged lease, only to misjudge the flames? And yet, Lang's name lingered too, tied to Hawthorne's suspicions of crooked accounts. Baines's honesty, unpolished but sincere, had added a new thread to the pattern. You're a good man, Tom, she said, turning to go. Squire's End is lucky to have you. Do take care, and if you think of anything else, my door is always open. Baines mumbled a thanks, his cap twisted in his hands, and Miss Marple made her way back to the lane, the manor's shadow falling long across her path. The evening air was cool, tinged with the scent of wood smoke from a distant chimney, and she pulled her shawl closer, her thoughts as clear as the stars beginning to prick the sky. Baines, she thought, was like old Mr. Tanner, the gardener in St. Mary Mead, who saw everything but said little until pressed. His sighting of Crane was a revelation, but it raised as many questions as it answered. Why had Crane been near the study, and what had he meant to do with the paraffin? And what of Lang, whose name kept surfacing like a weed in a flower bed? As she neared Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple's mind turned to her next move. She would share Baines's story with Inspector Craddock discreetly to ensure it was followed up, and she would revisit the study, if possible, to examine the safe behind the painting. The papers it held or didn't hold might be the key to the fire's purpose. For now, she entered her parlor, the familiar scent of lavender greeting her, and sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The truth, she knew, was like a knot in a skein of wool, tangled, but not impossible to unravel, and with each quiet conversation, she was closer to finding the thread that would pull it all apart. Chapter 8. A clue in the ashes. The following morning dawned with a restless energy in St. Mary Mead, as if the village itself sensed the undercurrents of suspicion swirling around Squire's End. Miss Jane Marple, having slept on Tom Bain's troubling revelation, rose early, her mind as sharp as the frost that dusted her garden. The image of Victor Crane with a paraffin can near the study windows had lodged itself in her thoughts, a vivid thread in the tapestry of clues she was weaving. She resolved to return to the manor, where Inspector Craddock was still combing through the wreckage of Reginald Hawthorne's study. A closer look at the scene, she felt, might yield the missing piece that would tie Crane or another to the crime. She donned her warmest coat, for the July air had taken a chilly turn, and set out with her usual air of purposeful calm. The path to Squire's End was quiet, save for the chatter of sparrows and the distant bark of a dog. As she approached the manor's gates, she noted the constable on duty, a young man who nodded respectfully but kept his distance. The house loomed before her, its soot-streaked facade a silent witness to the fire's violence. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not with fear but with the quiet thrill of pursuit, for she knew that truth, like a hidden bloom, often lay in the most overlooked corners. Inspector Craddock was in the study when she arrived, his lean figure silhouetted against the blackened windows. The room was as desolate as she remembered, its charred bookshelves and melted candelabrum a stark contrast to the manor's faded elegance. The air still held a faint acrid temps, though the worst of the debris had been cleared. Craddock looked up, his expression a mix of amusement and resignation. "Miss Marple," he said, straightening, "I should have known you'd be back. Come to offer more condolences, or is it the puzzle that's brought you?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes twinkling with that disarming warmth that had coaxed many a secret. "A bit of both, Inspector," she said, stepping carefully over a scorched floorboard. "I couldn't help thinking of poor Mr. Hawthorne, and how this room must hold the answers. You've been so thorough, I'm sure, but might I take another look? An old woman's curiosity, you know." Craddock's lips twitched, but he waved a hand. "Go on, then. Just mind where you step. The floor's unsteady in places. We've gone over it twice, but there's precious little left. The fire, did its work well?" Miss Marple nodded, her gaze already sweeping the room. The desk, its mahogany blistered, remained the focal point, its surface littered with the singed papers she had noted before. She moved closer, her movements deliberate, and examined them anew. A letter from a solicitor, its edges curled, mentioned a property dispute in London. A contract for repairs, signed by Tom Baines, bore faint scorch marks, and there, half buried beneath a charred ledger, was a fragment of a lease, its ink blurred but one name clear, Victor Crane. "Curious, isn't it?" Craddock said, joining her. "That lease was on Hawthorne's desk the night he died. We found it just as you see. It's singed, but readable. Makes you wonder why the fire spared it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. "Very curious," she murmured, almost as if the fire was meant to destroy something else or To point to Mr. Crane, she straightened, her tone light. "Have you looked at the safe yet, Inspector?" Mrs. Hawthorne mentioned one, behind a painting. Craddock nodded, pointing to a scorched landscape on the wall, now propped against a chair. "We opened it yesterday. Nothing much inside, a few deeds, some cash, and a will leaving everything to Mrs. Hawthorne. No surprises there. If Hawthorne kept anything incriminating, it's either burned or wasn't in the safe to begin with." Miss Marple's lips pursed, a faint crease forming between her brows. The safe's contents, or lack thereof, were as telling as what remained on the desk. She turned her attention to the floor, where the rug's charred remains marked the fire's heart. Kneeling with surprising agility for her years, she peered at the ashes, her fingers brushing lightly over a pile of debris. There, glinting faintly, was a small metal clasp, warped by heat but recognizable as part of a document folder. "This," she said, holding it up, "might have held something important. Papers, perhaps, that didn't survive." Craddock took the clasp, his brow furrowing. "Could be. We found bits of folders like this, but nothing intact. If someone burned a specific document, they made sure it was gone." Miss Marple rose, dusting her hands. "Or tried to," she said softly. "Fires are unpredictable, Inspector. They destroy, but they also reveal. This lease, for instance, why was it spared when so much else was lost?" Craddock's eyes narrowed, catching her drift. "You think someone wanted it found? To point the finger at Crane." Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "I think people are careless with their intentions, even when they plan a crime. Mr. Crane's lease is a clue, but whether it accuses him or someone else, I'm not yet sure." Craddock rubbed his chin, his respect for her growing. "You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. Anything else you've noticed while you're poking about?" Miss Marple hesitated, then decided to share a piece of her findings. "I spoke with Tom Baines yesterday," she said, her voice low. "He saw Mr. Crane near the study windows that night, carrying a can that might have been paraffin. He's reluctant to speak, but I urged him to tell you. It may mean nothing, or everything." Craddock's expression sharpened. "Crane with paraffin. That's more than we had before. I'll have a word with Baines and Crane, for that matter. If he's our man, he's not as clever as he thinks." Miss Marple nodded, her face serene but her mind alive with possibilities. Crane's presence, the lease, the safe's emptiness, these were not random but part of a design, however flawed. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, years ago, when a grocer's assistant had burned a ledger to hide his theft, only to leave a receipt that betrayed him. Crane, she thought, might have made a similar misstep. But Lang's name lingered too, tied to Hawthorne's distrust of his accounts. And Mrs. Hawthorne, with her guarded fear, could not be dismissed. The fire, she sensed, was a desperate act, meant to conceal one truth while exposing another. She turned to the window, its frame blackened but intact, and peered out at the garden. The trampled grass she had noted before was still visible, a faint path leading to the trees. This path, she said, almost to herself, was it there before the fire? Craddock joined her, frowning. "The gardeners say no. Could be from the fire brigade, tramping about, but we're checking." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Just a thought. People come and go, even in a locked room, and paths, like clues, show where they've been." Craddock shook his head, half smiling. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'll have my men look into it. Anything else before you go?" Miss Marple shook her head, her mission complete for now. "You're doing splendidly, Inspector. I'll leave you to it and hope for clearer skies tomorrow." She paused, then added, "Do be careful with Mr. Crane. He's a nervous man, and nervous men can be unpredictable." Craddock escorted her to the hall, his mind already turning to the new leads. Miss Marple stepped into the crisp morning, the manor's shadow falling behind her. The lease fragment, The metal clasp, Baines's sighting, these were pieces of a puzzle, and she was beginning to see its shape. Crane was at its center, but whether as culprit or scapegoat, she could not yet say. Lang's ambition, Mrs. Hawthorne's secrets, and even Baines's loyalty were shadows at the edges, each with a role to play. As she walked home, the village waking around her, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her next step. She would need to learn more about the lease, its terms, its discrepancies, and what Crane might have hidden in that locked drawer. A word with Lily, her maid, might help. The girl had a knack for picking up gossip, and the safe, empty or not, warranted further thought. Had someone removed its contents before the fire, or had Hawthorne himself moved them? She entered Danemead Cottage, the scent of lavender soothing her senses, and sat by the window, her knitting untouched. The truth, she mused, was like a splinter in a finger small, but impossible to ignore. She would probe gently, patiently, until it surfaced. For now, she sipped her tea, the morning light soft on her face, and let the puzzle simmer in her mind, certain that the next clue was not far away. Chapter 9. The Locked Drawerth. The soft patter of rain greeted Miss Jane Marple as she sat in her parlor the next morning, her knitting needles idle in her lap. The events of the previous day, the lease fragment, the metal clasp, Tom Bain's sighting of Victor Crane had woven themselves into her thoughts, each a thread in the intricate pattern of Reginald Hawthorne's death. The locked drawer in Crane's cottage, glimpsed during her visit, nagged at her like a dropped stitch. It was, she felt, a hiding place for something Crane feared to reveal, and she resolved to learn its contents. Direct confrontation was not her way. Instead, she would employ a subtler tactic, one suited to the quiet cunning of St. Mary Mead. She summoned Lily, her maid, who bustled in with a tray of tea and a gleam of curiosity in her eyes. "Lily, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but purposeful, "I have a small favor to ask. You're such a clever girl, always so helpful with the village errands. I'd like you to pay a visit to Mr. Crane's cottage today. Take a basket, perhaps some of those jam tarts you made, and say you're delivering them on my behalf. While you're there, keep your eyes open. There's a desk in the sitting room, with a locked drawer. If you can, see what's inside, or at least what it looks like." Lily's eyes widened, a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Mr. Crane, miss, the tenant. He's a sharp one, they say, and not too friendly. What if he catches me snooping?" Miss Marple's smile was reassuring, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. "You won't be snooping, dear, just observing. You've a knack for noticing things, and Mr. Crane will think nothing of a kind girl bringing tarts. If he's difficult, just smile and leave. But if you can manage a glance at that drawer, it might help the inspector greatly, and we mustn't keep secrets from justice, must we?" Lily nodded, her resolve firming under Miss Marple's gentle encouragement. "I'll do it, miss, for you and the inspector. Shall I go now?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "After lunch, I think. And do be careful, Lily. You're a treasure, and I'd hate to lose you to Mr. Crane's temper." Lily grinned, scurrying off to prepare the tarts. And Miss Marple returned to her knitting, though her mind was far from the pale blue scarf taking shape. The drawer, she thought, was the key to Crane's motives. If it held a forged lease, as she suspected, it would explain his nervousness, his presence near the study, and perhaps the fire itself. But why burn the original if a copy remained? And what of Percival Lang's accounts, or Mrs. Hawthorne's guarded fear? The puzzle was complex, but Miss Marple had unraveled knottier ones before. By mid-afternoon, the rain had eased to a fine mist, and Lily set out for Crane's cottage, her basket covered with a checkered cloth. Miss Marple waited in her parlor, her eyes on the clock but her thoughts with Lily. She recalled a similar ruse years ago, when she'd sent a neighbor's boy to check a shed for stolen goods. The boy's innocence had disarmed the thief, and Miss Marple hoped Lily's charm would work the same magic. Lily returned an hour later, her cheeks flushed and her apron slightly damp. "Oh, miss, I did it," she said, setting the basket on the table. Mr. Crane was surly at first, but he took the tarts and let me in for a cup of tea. Said he wasn't one for sweets, but he ate two while I was there. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Well done, Lily. And the drawer. Did you see anything?" Lily nodded, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I managed a peek when he went to fetch the kettle. The desk was open, just for a moment, and I saw a paper in the drawer folded, with a red wax seal, like the ones on the manor's leases. Couldn't read it, but it looked important. Then he came back, and I made like I was straightening the table. He didn't suspect a thing, I'm sure of it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. "A red wax seal," she repeated softly. "How very interesting. You've done splendidly, Lily. This may be just what the inspector needs. Now, have a biscuit, and tell me, how did Mr. Crane seem? Nervous, perhaps?" Lily took a biscuit, her brow furrowing. "Jumpy, miss. Kept looking at the door, like he expected someone to barge in. And when I mentioned the fire, just in passing, he went all quiet, like I'd struck a nerve. Said he was sick of the police asking questions, and he'd done nothing wrong." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The sealed document, the red wax, Crane's unease, these were not mere coincidences, but signposts to a truth she was closing in on. She recalled Mrs. Hawthorne's mention of the lease dispute, Baines's sighting of Crane with a paraffin can, and the singed lease on Hawthorne's desk. The drawer's contents, she suspected, were a forged lease, crafted to secure Crane's tenancy at a favorable rate or to claim rights he didn't have. The fire, then, was an attempt to destroy the original, but its failure had left Crane exposed. "Thank you, Lily," she said, her voice warm. "You've been a great help. Now, run along and rest you've earned it, and not a word to anyone, mind. We mustn't tip our hand." Lily promised, her eyes bright with the thrill of her mission, and Miss Marple sat back, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts elsewhere. The forged lease, if that's what it was, explained much. Crane's temper, his presence near the study, the fire's targeted destruction, but questions remained. Had Crane acted alone, or was another hand at work? Percival Lang's name lingered, tied to Hawthorne's distrust of his accounts, and Mrs. Hawthorne's fear could she have known of the forgery, or had her own secrets driven the tragedy? Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Inspector Craddock. She would share Lily's discovery, discreetly, to prompt a search of Crane's cottage, but she would also pursue the safe's contents, for its emptiness nagged at her. Had someone Lang, perhaps, or even Mrs. Hawthorne removed papers before the fire, and the trampled grass outside the study windows, noted during her last visit, suggested another presence, one the locked room could not fully conceal. She rose, moving to her writing desk to jot a note to Craddock, her handwriting precise, despite her years. "Dear Inspector," she wrote, "a small matter has come to my attention regarding Mr. Crane's cottage. A document with a red wax seal, possibly a lease, may be found in a locked drawer in his sitting room. It may shed light on the fire's motive. I trust you'll handle it with your usual care. Yours, Jane Marple." She sealed the note, resolving to have Lily deliver it to the police station tomorrow. As evening fell, the rain returning in a gentle patter, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting a soft rhythm in the quiet. The locked drawer had yielded its secret, or at least a glimpse of it, and she felt the puzzle's edges sharpening. Crane was at its heart, but the shadows of Lang, Mrs. Hawthorne, and even Baines, loomed large. She thought of a case in St. Mary, Mead, when a forger's hasty lie had unraveled under the weight of a single receipt. Crane's forgery, if proven, might do the same, but the fire's purposed destruction, or distraction, remained elusive. She set her knitting aside, her eyes on the flickering flames. The truth, she knew, was like a shadow in a storm fleeting, but visible to those who watched closely. She would watch, she would listen, and she would wait. The next piece of the puzzle, she was certain, was already within reach. Chapter 10. The Widow's Confession. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle by the time Miss Jane Marple invited Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne for tea at Danemead Cottage, a decision prompted by the widow's guarded demeanor and the mounting clues, pointing to Victor Crane's forgery. The parlor, with its chintz, curtains, and crackling fire, was a haven of warmth against the gray afternoon, and Miss Marple arranged the tea tray with care. Delicate cups, a plate of shortbread, and a pot of her best Darjeeling. Her aim was not merely to comfort, but to probe. For Mrs. Hawthorne's fleeting hesitations at the memorial tea suggested a burden she carried alone. Miss Marple, with her gentle persistence, was determined to ease it into the light. Mrs. Hawthorne arrived promptly, her black morning dress damp at the hem, her face pale but composed beneath a veiled hat. She accepted Miss Marple's welcome with a faint smile, though her gray eyes held a wariness that spoke of sleepless nights. "You're very kind to invite me," she said, settling into an armchair. "The manor feels so empty now, and the village, well, the whispers never stop." Miss Marple's expression was one of tender sympathy as she poured the tea. "My dear, you've borne so much," she said, her voice soft as the rain outside. "The loss of a husband is trial enough without the weight of gossip. But here, you're among friends. Tell me, how are you managing?" Mrs. Hawthorne's fingers tightened on her cup, a faint tremor betraying her calm. "As best I can," she said. "Reginald was not an easy man, but he was my husband. His death fits left a void, and the questions, the police, the inquest." She trailed off, her gaze drifting to the fire. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but unyielding. "It's dreadful, isn't it, to have such private grief laid bare? I remember you mentioned Mr. Hawthorne's suspicions about Mr. Crane, and that lease. It must have troubled you, knowing he was so preoccupied." Mrs. Hawthorne's lips parted, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "You've a good memory, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low. "Yes, Reginald was obsessed with that lease. He was certain Crane had tampered with it, forged it, even, to cheat him on the rent. He confronted Crane that very day, in the study. I heard them shouting, though I couldn't make out the words." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "How distressing," she said. "A confrontation like that would unsettle anyone. Did Mr. Hawthorne share his plans? Was he going to take action against Mr. Crane?" Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated, her eyes darting to the window as if seeking escape. "He was," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "He told me he'd found proof something in the lease that didn't match his records. He meant to have Crane evicted, or worse. He locked himself in the study that night, going over his papers. I begged him to let it be, but Reginald was relentless." Miss Marple leaned forward, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. "You poor dear, caught in such a storm, and then the fire. It must have been a terrible shock. Did you suspect, even then, that Mr. Crane might have been involved?" Mrs. Hawthorne's composure cracked, her cup rattling in its saucer. "I didn't know what to think," she said, her voice trembling. "When the servants woke me, the study was ablaze, and Reginald, I couldn't bear to think of it. But Crane, he was so angry, so desperate. I told the inspector what Reginald had said, but I never imagined." She stopped, her hand rising to her mouth. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but her voice was gentle as she pressed forward. "You did right to tell the inspector," she said. "But there's something more, isn't there? Something weighing on you. My dear, you needn't carry it alone. A trouble shared is a trouble halved, as my mother used to say." Mrs. Hawthorne's gaze met hers, and for a moment, the room was silent, save for the fire's soft crackle and the rain's steady patter. Then, as if a dam had broken, the widow's words spilled out. "It's not just Crane," she said, her voice raw. "I've not been honest, Not with the police, not with anyone. Reginald was miserly, cruel even, and I took money from the household funds, small amounts, over the years, to keep for myself. I was afraid he'd leave me with nothing, that I'd be penniless if he died. He suspected someone was stealing, but he never guessed it was me. When he died, I thought God forgive me. I thought it might be a chance to start anew, but the fire, the questions, I'm so afraid they'll find out. Miss Marple's face softened, though her mind was racing. The confession, though not unexpected, was a new thread in the pattern, one that complicated the puzzle. "My dear," she said, reaching out to touch Mrs. Hawthorne's hand, "you've been brave to tell me, and I promise you, this stays between us. But tell me, did anyone else know of this? Mr. Lang, perhaps, or someone who managed the accounts?" Mrs. Hawthorne shook her head, her eyes brimming. "No one. I was careful, small sums, hidden in my sewing box. Lang never saw the household books. Reginald kept those himself. I swear, Miss Marple, I didn't kill him. I hated his cruelty, but I'd never—" She choked back a sob, her composure crumbling. Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice steady. "I believe you, my dear. You've done no more than many a wife in a hard marriage. But you must tell the inspector, when the time comes. It will ease your heart, and it may help him see the truth. For now, rest here a little. You're safe." Mrs. Hawthorne nodded, her tears subsiding under Miss Marple's calm assurance. They sipped their tea in silence, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Miss Marple's thoughts, however, were anything but still. The widow's confession, while poignant, did not make her a murderer, but it added a layer to the motive. Had Crane known of her thefts, or had Lang, despite her denial? The fire, she thought, was meant to destroy evidence, but whose brains? Forged lease, Lang's crooked accounts, or Mrs. Hawthorne's pilfering? She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a housekeeper had skimmed from the pantry funds, only to be caught when a ledger was mislaid. Mrs. Hawthorne's fear mirrored that woman's, but her theft seemed a side note, not the fire's cause. Crane remained the focal point, his confrontation with Hawthorne a spark that might have ignited the blaze. Yet Lang's ambition and Baines's loyalty could not be ignored, each a shadow in the puzzle's corners. As Mrs. Hawthorne prepared to leave, her face less haunted than when she arrived, Miss Marple offered a final word. "You're stronger than you know," she said, "and the truth, however painful, will set you free. Come back if you need to talk, my dear." Mrs. Hawthorne murmured her thanks and stepped into the rain, her figure fading into the mist. Miss Marple closed the door, her mind already turning to her next move. She had sent Lily's discovery of the sealed document to Inspector Craddock, and she trusted he would act on it. But the safe's emptiness, the trampled grass, and now Mrs. Hawthorne's secret, they suggested a deeper game, one where the fire was both weapon and misdirection. She sat by the fire, her knitting untouched, and let the puzzle simmer. The truth, she knew, was like a pebble in a stream small, but enough to ripple the surface. She would nudge those ripples, with a quiet word to Craddock, or a visit to Lang's office, until the full picture emerged. For now, she sipped her tea, the rain, a soft lullaby, and waited for the next thread to pull. Chapter 11. The trap is set. The drizzle of the previous day had cleared, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in a tentative sunlight that gleamed on the cobblestones and sparkled in the dewdrops clinging to Miss Jane Marple's roses. She sat in her parlor, the Morning Post unopened on the table, her mind wholly occupied with the puzzle of Reginald Hawthorne's death, Mrs. Hawthorne's confession, Lily's glimpse of the sealed document in Victor Crane's drawer, and Tom Baines's sighting of Crane with a paraffin can had woven a pattern that pointed, with increasing clarity, to the tenant's guilt. Yet Miss Marple, ever cautious, knew that clarity could be a trap in itself. The fire's purpose, whether to destroy a forged lease or to mask another crime remained elusive, and she sensed the shadows of Percival Lang and Mrs. Hawthorne still lingered at the edges. She rose, her movements brisk despite the hour, and penned a note to Inspector Craddock, inviting him for tea at Danemead Cottage. The note was brief but precise. Dear Inspector, I have a thought or two about the Squire's End case that might interest you. Could you spare an hour this afternoon? Tea at 3. Yours, Jane Marple. She entrusted the note to Lily, who scurried off to the police station, and then set about preparing her parlor for the visit. The tea tray was laid with care scones, clotted cream, and a pot of Earl Grey, though Miss Marple's true offering would be the strategy she had devised to test. Crane's guilt. Craddock arrived promptly at 3, his lean frame filling the doorway, his expression a blend of curiosity and wry amusement. Miss Marple, he said, removing his hat, your invitations always come with a catch. What's on your mind this time? Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her eyes twinkling as she gestured to an armchair. Only a desire to help, Inspector, she said, pouring tea with a steady hand. You've been so patient with my meddling, and I thought it time to share a theory. But first, tell me, have you searched Mr. Crane's cottage yet? I mentioned that document Lily saw, with the red wax seal. Craddock nodded, accepting a scone. We did, this morning. Found it in the drawer, just as your girl described a lease, or a copy of one, with Crane's signature and a red wax seal. It's with our documents man now, but it looks off. The terms don't match the manor's records, and the paper's newer than it should be. If it's a forgery, it's a clumsy one. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. How very interesting, she said. And Mr. Crane, what did he say? Craddock's jaw tightened. Denied everything, of course. Swears the lease is genuine, says Hawthorne was out to cheat him. But he was sweating, Miss Marple nervous as a cat. We're keeping an eye on him, but we need more to make an arrest stick. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. The forged lease, Crane's denials, the paraffin candle were pieces of a puzzle, but the fire's intent was the key. Had Crane meant to destroy the original lease, only to misjudge the flames? Or was he a scapegoat, his forgery a convenient clue for another's purpose? She set her cup down, her voice gentle but purposeful. Inspector, I've been thinking about those papers on the desk, the ones that survived the fire. It's odd, isn't it, that a blaze so fierce spared just enough to point to Mr. Crane, almost as if someone wanted them found. Craddock's eyes narrowed, catching her drift. You think it was staged? To frame Crane? Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression enigmatic. I think people are careless with their secrets, even when they plan a crime. But Mr. Crane's nervousness suggests he's hiding something, perhaps the fire itself. I have an idea, Inspector, a way to test him. It's a bit like setting a trap for a mouse, but we must be careful not to scare him off. Craddock leaned forward, his interest piqued. A trap? Go on, then what's your plan? Miss Marple's smile was faint but resolute. Let it be known, discreetly, that a duplicate lease was found in Mr. Hawthorne's safe and burned, and contradicting Mr. Crane's version. Spread the word through the village, perhaps through Mrs. Bantry, who's wonderfully indiscreet. If Mr. Crane is guilty, he'll panic, fearing his forgery is exposed. He may try to destroy the supposed duplicate, or flee, or betray himself in some way. And if he's innocent, well, he'll do nothing, and we'll know to look elsewhere. Craddock rubbed his chin, a slow grin spreading. That's clever, Miss Marple, devious even. If Crane takes the bait, we'll have him. And if not, we've lost nothing. But what about the others, Mrs. Hawthorne, Lang, Baines? Any chance they're in on it? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but her tone remained mild. Mrs. Hawthorne has her own secrets, as I've learned, but I don't believe she set the fire. Mr. Lang's ambition makes him a question mark. His accounts may hide something, but we've no proof yet. And Tom Baines, bless him, is too honest for murder, though his loyalty might blind him. For now, Mr. Crane is our mouse, and the safe is our cheese." Craddock laughed, a rare sound that warmed the parlor. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'll set it up, get the rumor out by evening, with Mrs. Bantry's help. My men will watch Crane's cottage tonight, and the manor, in case he makes a move. If he tries for the safe, we'll have him red-handed." Miss Marple nodded, her satisfaction tempered by caution. "Be discreet, Inspector. A nervous man is like a cornered animal. He may bolt or bite. And do check the safe again, just to be sure. Empty or not, it's part of this puzzle," Craddock promised, finishing his tea with a nod of gratitude. "I'll keep you posted, Miss Marple. And if this works, I owe you more than scones." She sought him to the door, the sunlight soft on her face, and returned to her parlor, her mind already turning to the night's possibilities. The trap was set, but traps, she knew, could catch more than their intended prey. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a rumor of stolen jewels had flushed out a thief, but also revealed a liar among the servants. Crane, she thought, was the likely culprit, but Lang's smooth charm and Mrs. Hawthorne's hidden thefts kept her wary. By evening, the rumor had taken root, as rumors do in small villages. Mrs. Bantry, delighted to play her part, had mentioned the duplicate lease at the post office, where it spread like wildfire. Miss Marple, dining on a simple supper of soup and bread, imagined Crane's reaction, his sharp features tightening, his hands trembling as he weighed his options. She had no doubt he would act. The question was how. At midnight, a knock at her door startled her from her knitting. Lily, in her nightcap, answered it, admitting a breathless constable. "Miss Marple," he said, "Inspector Craddock sent me. It's Craney's at the manor, trying to break into the safe. We caught him in the act, and he's confessing everything." Miss Marple's eyes widened, though her voice remained calm. "Goodness, how extraordinary. What did he say?" The constable, eager to share, recounted the scene. Crane, caught prying open the safe's lock, had collapsed under the weight of his guilt. "I forged the lease," he cried, his voice breaking. "Hawthorne was going to evict me, found out. I'd faked the terms to keep the cottage cheap. I only meant to burn the original, not kill him. The fire got out of hand, spread too fast. He was in custody now, his confession recorded, though Craddock was still questioning him." Miss Marple nodded, her satisfaction tinged with sadness. "Poor man," she said softly. "Greed and fear make such fools of us. Thank the inspector for me, and tell him I'll call tomorrow." "You've done well, lad." The constable left, and Miss Marple sat by the fire. Her knitting resumed, but her thoughts far from the scarf. Crane's confession fit the pattern, the forged lease, the paraffin, the fire's failure to destroy all it was meant to. Yet she felt a quiet unease. The trap had worked, but too neatly, perhaps. Lang's accounts, Mrs. Hawthorne's thefts, the empty safe, they were loose ends, and Miss Marple disliked loose ends. For now, she let the fire's warmth soothe her, certain that the final piece of the puzzle would surface, as truth always did, in its own time. Chapter 12. The Quiet of St. Mary Mead. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Dane Mead Cottage, casting delicate patterns on the parlor floor where Miss Jane Marple sat with her tea. The village of St. Mary Mead had resumed its gentle rhythm, the clamor of Reginald Hawthorne's death subsiding like ripples on a pond. Victor Crane's confession, extracted in the wake of Miss Marple's cunning trap, had brought the case to a close, yet she felt a quiet melancholy as she sipped her Earl Grey. Truth, she knew, was a bitter tonic, and Crane's fall, though just, was a reminder of human frailty. Her knitting lay untouched, a soft pile of pale blue wool. As she reflected on the puzzle now solved, Lily bustled in her apron crisp, her eyes bright with the village's latest talk. "Miss Marple, It's all anyone's speaking of," she said, setting a plate of toast on the table. "Mr. Crane in irons, confessing to the fire and all. Mrs. Bantry says you're a wonder, solving it like that. How did you know it was him, Miss?" Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes crinkling with a warmth that belied her sharp mind. "I didn't know, Lily, not at first," she said, spreading marmalade with care. "But people leave traces, like footprints, in a garden. Mr. Crane's temper, his forged lease, the paraffin candle, were all clues, pointing to a man desperate to hide his deceit. The trap only confirmed it." Lily nodded, though her brow furrowed. "But what about Mrs. Hawthorne, and that Mr. Lang? Folk thought they might have had a hand in it too." Miss Marple set her knife down, her expression thoughtful. "They had their secrets, dear, as people often do. Mrs. Hawthorne's little thefts were born of fear, not malice. She's promised to make amends, and I believe she will. Mr. Lang's ambition made him suspect, but his accounts, as the inspector found, were merely sloppy, not criminal. And Tom Bainswell, his loyalty was his only fault. None of them set the fire. That was Mr. Crane's doing, and his alone." She leaned back, her mind drifting to the days of quiet observation that had led to this moment. The singed lease on Hawthorne's desk, spared by the flames, had been the first thread, hinting at a motive tied to Crane's tenancy. Tom Baines's sighting of Crane with a paraffin can had tightened the weave, and Lily's glimpse of the sealed document in the locked drawer had all but confirmed the forgery. The trap spreading word of a duplicate lease in the safe had been the final tug, unraveling Crane's nerve and drawing his confession. He had meant to burn the original lease, he admitted, to hide his fraud, but the fire had raged beyond his control, claiming Hawthorne's life. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts turning to the manor's other shadows. Mrs. Hawthorne, chastened by her confession, had begun to rebuild, her fear giving way to a tentative resolve. Percival Lang, cleared of wrongdoing, had returned to his office, though Miss Marple suspected he would be more cautious in future. Tom Baines continued his work at Squire's End, his honest labor a quiet anchor in the storm. The village, too, had settled, its gossip turning to milder matters: weddings, harvests, the vicar's new sermon, and the safe. Miss Lily asked, breaking her reverie, "Was there really a duplicate lease, or was that just your trick?" Miss Marple's lips twitched, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "A trick, Lily, but a necessary one. The safe was empty, as the inspector said: deeds, cash, a will, nothing more. But Mr. Crane didn't know that. Fear of exposure was his undoing, as it so often is." Lily shook her head, marveling. "You're a proper detective, miss, and no mistake. Will you tell Mrs. Bantry how you did it? She's dying to know." Miss Marple laughed softly, a sound like the chime of a distant bell. "I'll tell her enough to satisfy, but the details are best left quiet. People, you see, are like my knitting. They think the pattern's simple, but it's the small stitches that hold it together, and those, I find, are best kept to oneself." Lily grinned, clearing the table, and Miss Marple rose, moving to the window. The garden was a riot of color, roses and delphiniums swaying in the breeze, and beyond, the village hummed with life. She thought of Crane, now in custody, his sharp features haunted by the weight of his choices. She thought of Hawthorne, a man whose greed had sown the seeds of his own destruction. And she thought of St. Mary Mead, where human nature, with all its flaws, played out in miniature, a microcosm of the world's joys and sorrows. The case was closed. But Miss Marple knew the village would not stay quiet for long. Another ripple would come, a quarrel, a secret, a mystery, and she would be ready, her eyes as keen as ever, her mind a net for catching truths. For now, she picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly, and let the morning's peace envelop her. People, she mused aloud, to no one but the roses beyond the glass. think they can hide their sins, but the truth always shows. Like a stitch dropped in a pattern, she smiled, her tea grown cold, and turned her thoughts to the day ahead, a visit to Mrs. Bantry, perhaps, or a walk to the church. The puzzle of Squire's End was solved, but life, like her knitting, was an endless skein, and Miss Marple, ever watchful, would follow its threads wherever they led.